Hello all. Today I've got Adam Bittlingmayer here from ModelFront, a company that works with AI and uses the good things of AI in machine translation. So welcome, Adam, today.
Hi, Veit.
So you mentioned earlier that you build AI to police AI. Policing meaning that AI watches another AI. So how does your solution actually work?
Right. So yeah, I like to joke that I used to work at Google Translate, and now ModelFront predicts when Google Translate is wrong. But it's a simplification, right? So, I mean, if you look at the sort of history of human quality translation, right, which is a very different thing, there really haven't been any huge changes, over the past 3 decades or so, right? Really, the biggest efficiency was the translation memory, right? And then machine translation post-editing, it's used, right? But it doesn't make things, with a TM, you can get, let's say, 80% ICEs, right? You see that a lot. So that's a 5x speed up, right? Plus exacts and so on. And you can get maybe 10x, right? So that 10x, from a sort of Silicon Valley perspective, a 10x change is like it's not just a scale change, it's a qualitatively, it's a leap. And with machine translation post-editing, we haven't really seen that, right? The translators, many of them resist it, and I started to realize they have a point. The numbers show that the cognitive effort of reading and understanding and looking for those errors, especially with this deceptively fluent neural output, is what takes most of the time and effort for a human translator, right? They have to look for the few segments that need to be edited. And so if you talk to somebody from outside the industry, you say, there's 2 facts here which are kind of contradictory. The first fact is, hey, in a lot of workflows today, at the post-editing step, also at the review step, 90% of the segments are not being edited at all. But just having people review those machine translations still costs about $1 per sentence. There's a lot of folks translating millions of sentences. So if you can predict when the AI translation was correct, or conversely predict when it was wrong, you can save folks a lot of time and money on translation, and thereby do a lot more content with the same resources.
Yeah, I can confirm that from my daily work as well. So machine translation results are very erratic, and you never know what you're going to get. So I'm curious, how can we trust your AI to police the AI? Why is your AI a little bit better than the AI that is behind the machine translation that produces the pre-translation?
Right. This was one of the things that I thought about a lot when I was at Google, which is if you put something into Google search that it can't find any results, it says, sorry, I don't have any results. But with machine translation, we always expect it to spit out something, even if it requires more context, even if the input is bad, right? So we kind of have set it up for failure because that's the shape that we need. We give you text, we get back text. And so with ModelFront, with quality prediction in general, you want it to sort of be conservative. So it approves things on a very narrow band. And if anything deviates from that because of a mistake or because it requires more context and more input, then the answer is always just send it to a human. I compare it a little bit to a self-driving car, right? So when, the first sort of self-driving vehicles were things like railroads, it's on a fixed track. now you have a few buses in Zurich and Luxembourg and so on, where it's sort of, in a sort of slow pedestrian zone. This thing doesn't need to deal with crazy maneuvers on the highway. It just, as soon as somebody walks in front of it, it just stops, right? So I look at automation for translation the same way, which is like we slowly open up in a very sort of controlled environment in order to increase efficiency.
Mm. So right now, what are your biggest challenges? I'm wondering, is it compute? Is it getting the best developers? Is it discovering new algorithms to fine tune your AI? What is it?
Definitely, talent is always, I think, an underappreciated bottleneck to developing, machine learning. But I would say that the enemy, so to speak, is always the status quo, right? So when you're sort of creating a category, a new type of technology, a new approach, there are 1,000 sort of hidden ways that the current situation, is sort of locked in, and until you push up against that, you won't realize it, right? So just in terms of mentalities, pricing models, organizational structures, TMS integrations, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm. And I'm wondering, is there a certain threshold in terms of words or money where from which onwards your solution makes sense? I'm just asking this because there are, of course, lots of smaller agencies who have this problem, erratic machine translation results. But does it make sense for these small companies, or is it something for bigger companies, for corporate customers maybe, who have the continuous localization process?
Right. So yeah, I think that goes to our back to our first a few questions ago about sort of the self-driving, right? So if you look at what's a good candidate for automation, it's always going to be the things with a large volume, where it's kind of repetitive too, right? And it's sort of the highway or the railroad of translation. And the more boutique stuff is almost like, those lovely pedestrian zones, or, right, it's like walking through a bazaar. And it's just as important, it's high value, it's pleasant, it's higher quality, etc. But it is fundamentally fragmented and hard to. And so we at ModelFront, we focus on those higher volume sort of workflows where we can make them much more efficient in production. I do think that machine translation quality prediction in general can be used to deal with some of the operational challenges of a small LSP, right? The fragmentation, where, okay, you're getting a new customer walking in the door every day, you need to give a quote, you need to set up their machine translation, all of this stuff. I do think that this similar technology can be applicable there. And I think, for example, Unbabel have sort of established and shared some of the processes for doing this. The keyword would probably be quality estimation for quality evaluation.
And what could be your degree of customization when you work with a customer? Do you have to go in as a service consultant and redesign everything from scratch, or does your solution work out of the box as a SaaS solution kind of thing?
Right. So it is a SaaS solution. We started this as a obviously small company, and our idea is, look, people, they have their MT, they use Google or Microsoft or Amazon or Systran or DeepL. They have their TMS like RWS, XTM, and they have their agencies. And in many cases, our customers have multiple engines depending on the language pair, or they have multiple TMSs depending on the content type, or they have multiple agencies. And we don't want to change any of that. So they keep all of that. And this is just, if you kind of imagine in your workflow, right, you have the TMS, it calls the machine translation. And then after that, it calls our API. So from that perspective, right, it's just sort of plug and play. But the caveat here is that in order to achieve the same quality of the final output, this absolutely requires customization on the customer's data. Absolutely, right? Because we are expecting this to enforce the terminology, the style, to understand the context, so to speak, like, oh, these are product titles, or this is a automobile manual, right? And so that absolutely requires customization, because as you know better than I do, right, what is a good and bad translation is extremely customer specific.
That's right. In terms of liking and also in terms of trust, I think. So I was curious. I think you travel between 3 countries or 3 cultures even. Why do you think some people trust AI more than others? Because I think that's the reality. It's people have a gut feeling of AI, whether it's related to translation
Mm-hmm.
or autonomous driving or getting recommendations on the internet. What do you think drives this? What's behind this trust mechanism?
I think that we ourselves are a bit contradictory. So we may trust AI in one area and not trust it in another. And we may not, for example, I don't trust ChatGPT to write something for me where I can just not look at it and send it. Actually, what's happening with ChatGPT is the same thing that already happened in the translation industry, which is people are realizing, oh, it's deceptively fluent, but I still have to go and look through everything, and it's a little bit faster, but it's not like radically fast. So it does create lots of other new use cases and so on. But for those things that had to be written, like, I have an investor update email I should have sent a week ago. It's not going to replace my time and effort for that, or I would have already sent it, right? So we do tend to trust AI, like, in the sense that, right, people are, I don't know, they're scrolling through LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, and AI is deciding what is being shown to them, and it's not about if you trust it or not. It's just those platforms have decided that they receive more engagement this way. Now, right. So, but I think when you're sort of an expert, right, and it's a high value problem and it's your daily work, I think, yeah, it's natural to not trust it, especially if it's going to be sort of going out under your name. Whereas sort of if you're the one who has to spend money, then all of a sudden you see things very differently, right?
Yeah.
And I like to think that at like my work at Google, which included things like maintaining the Google Chrome, Google Translate integration, which is also in Android, right? Android is used by a few billion people, right? And so it's extremely high volume, and we essentially succeeded in making sort of crappy translation free for most of humanity, along with maybe Yandex and Baidu. Microsoft also contributed to that. So we made crappy translation free for most of humanity. But I don't think that we replaced a single human translator with all of that. Right? The human translation industry has only grown in that time. But what did happen is a lot of people who couldn't have gotten translation at all now have access to translation. Remember, for 80% of internet users, 95 to 99% of the internet is not in their language. It's not in a language that they can understand, right? Most people on Earth don't understand English. Only 1 billion people do. So it really, like, when you get to trusting AI, it's like, hey, if my only choice is nothing or this AI translation, I'm always fine with the AI translation.
Yeah, I agree. So far we have been talking about the good things of AI, but there are also bad things, like robot soldiers or warfare based on artificial intelligence, that
Right.
type of thing. So, and there's a debate going on about, stopping research on AI. I think it was even proposed by Sam Altman, who's behind OpenAI, who's behind
Right.
ChatGPT. Do you think stopping the research on AI will bring any results, or is this a fantasy?
So I don't think it's either possible nor desirable. So it's not possible to stop it, let's say, even within the West. And we wouldn't want to achieve that, because then, simply put, other axes will get ahead on that, and then we really won't have any human rights when they take over, because they operate quite differently. So I think there's no way out but through, so to speak. We should double down on this. This is one of our strengths as a open society, and also to develop it in a way that does, protect human rights, and so on. So I think we have to make sure that we in the collective West, and the countries, let's say like Taiwan, which share our values, are the leaders in this, so that we're not overrun. I know this is a little bit uncomfortable, of course, for many in Western Europe who've sort of gotten used to having a somebody else provide our security. I grew up in mainly in the U.S., but when I was a little kid, I lived in West Berlin, right? And I'm quite grateful, to the United States for that. So I didn't have to suffer, Soviet labor camps and or death like much of my family did. And so I think that the U.S. And the collective West should sort of double down on AI.
Yeah, I wish. I agree. It just seems a bit low in Europe, on my opinion, a bit conservative maybe. But anyway, that's a different discussion. I wanted to ask you. I mean, your business model depends on translation, actually. The act of translation. If there's no translation, if there's no machine translation, you couldn't. There would be no reason for you to develop your product. Is it? How do you see the future with the ability of ChatGPT actually writing content? Making any translation unnecessary.
Right.
Will this
So you're
be
exactly
a reality in the future?
right. We don't just depend on, the machine translation existing. We really depend on the human translation existing, because we are AI to make human quality translation more efficient, right? And the human translation industry has been growing, and it will continue to grow, from my view. Sorry, what was the tail end of the question?
Well, in principle, ChatGPT has the ability to write content. So if you want to write content in Ukrainian about something, you could just tell ChatGPT to write this content. There is no necessity to have an English original text to translate into Ukrainian, for example.
Right. So I think that this is very similar to what happened with machine translation when we sort of made it like popularly available. So there will be new use cases created for that. So I mean, there will be people that do that, but it will not, in my view, and I disagree with a lot of smart people in the translation industry on this. In my view, that will not replace human translation, or our, the workflows that we're talking about today, the translation industry. That will not replace any of those, because like fundamentally, the translation problem is I have some content, now I need it translated. If you're from the business side, right? I have what I have. We already approved this. Marketing already approved these messages, or it's technical documentation, right? So and translation, they like to say, is downstream. People even like to complain about the fact that it's downstream. But in this case, like it sort of is a strength. Like translation is fundamentally downstream from content creation. And if you look at it from a user perspective, it kind of makes sense, right? Like I don't really want to be reading ChatGPT generated stuff in any language. I want to read original, thoughtful content. And when I have a translation need, it's because I stumbled upon something and I want that thing translated. I don't want something else. I want that. So I actually don't. I don't see this happening. You know, there are a few niche cases. Something like say certain e-com marketplaces where they have structured data and then they have these templates, right? And that already existed though. That doesn't require ChatGPT. But in other areas, I just don't see this happening. I know it's unpopular right now to say that, but
yeah, okay. So I was going to ask you maybe something personal. I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you speak a lot of languages. So I'm curious, you know, how did you get there? What's the trick?
well, you didn't test me, so you don't know if it's true or not.
Okay, wir können Deutsch sprechen.
Na gut. O español, si quieres.
Español, okay.
Right. So the trick, it's really, you know, firstly, I have to say that the languages I speak are mainly related to each other. They're all Indo-European, right? Maybe from the Chinese perspective, they're all just different dialects of European, right? So, but really the trick is to not spend time on things that don't matter. So if you look at your usual curriculum for language learning, which most of them are a complete failure, right? I mean, if you look at the hours people put in versus what they get out, I can assure you I'm super lazy on this front, right? They're super efficient, however you want to look at it. It's just language, the words in the language are they have a Zipfian distribution, right? So you have the first few hundred words, and then it gets less and less after that. And you look at inevitably any curriculum, and people are learning words they'll never use. They're learning grammar that native speakers themselves don't even understand. All this stuff that's just useless. So it's really about sort of ruthless prioritization, and of course having fun to motivate yourself. That's my view.
And personally, do you learn from you know, e-learning content, or do you have friends who speak the other languages? Do you use this tandem model, or?
No, I mean I'm older. I'm older maybe than you think. So I sort of did all of my language learning before there was Duolingo, and now I have, you know, a company to run and a growing family. So I've sort of plateaued at about 8 languages, fluency in 8 languages. Right. So my approach was always just to have to basically to go look, whether it was, you know, going through books or watching, you know, I used to watch you know, soccer in Spanish and stuff like that, listen to songs, always just take the words that you hear most frequently and to write them down on a table, and then on a good old piece of paper, and quiz myself and go like that. And you got to spend a lot of hours listening, just listening, but not necessarily talking.
Yeah, great. And perhaps in closing, I wanted to ask you, we have been growing up with this paradigm of the Silicon Valley being, you know, sort of the brain of the world, where all the cool technology has been developed, where all the technological revolution has been happening. Do you think that AI can make it easier for small companies to challenge big companies? Do you think AI will it make possible to challenge this paradigm of Silicon Valley? Perhaps we will see, you know, Africa emerging as a superpower in technology in the future. Do you think we will see this in our lifetime?
Right. So there's sort of 2 questions here. There's sort of like Silicon Valley versus other ecosystems. And then there's like sort of, are these changes fundamentally friendly to big companies or to challengers? So actually, I think Silicon Valley had a tough time during COVID, and from far away, we sort of talk about Silicon Valley as one thing, but there's really San Francisco, which is outside of the valley, and then Silicon Valley itself, and so right now, paradoxically, downtown San Francisco is in absolute chaos. You can see different things on the media. I've been there myself enough times. I
Homeless
walk
people.
there.
That's what I see on the media, for example. High
And
rents, homeless
not just
people.
that, right? Yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in third world countries, in second world countries that are much poorer, right? And you don't see that, right? There's something else going on, but at the same time, a few, let's say a mile away, roughly 1 mile away, there is what's called Cerebral Valley. So in Hayes Valley, where there is just this AI thing taking off, and San Francisco, in some sense, has momentum again that it actually didn't have 2 years ago. So what I see specifically is that different like ecosystems have the different strengths. So AI is one, and I think AI, clearly San Francisco is one of the places. Canada to some degree, Cambridge and London, a few places in Europe, China, and so on are very strong in that. Europe has definitely been strong in deep tech because, right, fundamentally people from outside the US don't know how to market to US consumers, but, and machine learning and AI are just math, and, Europeans are pretty strong in math. And you mentioned Africa. Well, Africa is really strong in fintech.
Yeah, they had this, sort of leap. They were going directly from no technology to, online payments, basically, in many countries, or to the blockchain directly.
Right. So I think that's already emerged. It's not the future speculation, and it's hard to say what will come next. But I tend to see that each one of these sort of tech verticals is big enough to sustain its own kind of ecosystem. And then to the question about is this in favor of small companies or big companies? I'm a big believer in small companies. I have to be. And big companies are amazing, but they have these massive blind spots and massive weaknesses. I can say that having been in a few, and it's only increased since then. And it's easy to sort of say, and people were doing this in 2019. And when we started ModelFront, right, the first LLMs, the first large language models really came out in 2019. Multilingual large language models came out then, and people in academia were complaining, oh, we don't have enough compute and all of this stuff. And it's like, guys, they've melted an iceberg training this model and then given it out for free for anybody to download, right? You don't need to go train it. It's never been this good for folks with a limited budget, which was us when we started. And so I see all of this as generally good for disruptors. And the same thing is happening with this new class of large language models. Right? The commoditization, quote unquote, of these large language models is already happening. And it's just a matter of time before, something that OpenAI launched, a few months ago becomes something that, everybody can access, so to speak. By then, OpenAI will be onto something else, but that's a different story.
Yeah, it's going to stay very, very exciting, I think. So, Adam, thanks very much for joining this call, for sharing your thoughts. I'm super happy to have you here today, and I wish you best of luck with your company, ModelFront.
Likewise, best of luck with your company too, and thanks so much for organizing this and for all of the interesting questions and comments.
Okay, cheers. Bye bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.